Egypt. This is Egypt under Nasser. Egypt under Nasser was pretty great, you guys. It was pretty great. I'm tempted to put them in A, but I'll put them in B up here. Because they weren't Marxist-Lenin. Yeah, they're behind Afghanistan, but ahead of Bolivia. So they weren't Marxist-Leninists, obviously. They were part of the non-aligned movement, which was stupid. It was all these countries that were like, we're not going to join with the Soviets or the U.S. We're going to have our own thing. The non-aligned movement is dumb. It's like, just join with the Soviets. They're fighting the U.S. and they want to help you. Either way, Egypt at the time was the main protagonist against Israel, against Zionism. This was a time when the Arab peoples were more united, and the Egyptians were willing to lay it all on the line in order to fight against Israel. Of course, Israel then tried to seize the Sinai, and Egypt had to seize it back from them in 1973 and 1978. So they were attacked by Israel too, but they were also fighting on behalf of the Palestinians, which is very heroic. And it aligns with Nasser's ideology, which was pan-Arabism. He wanted to do what Mao did for China. He wanted to unite all of these different Arab countries that had their borders drawn by imperialist powers in order to make them easier to exploit and control. They want to keep us divided. So pan-Arabism is pretty much dead now. I mean, it is dead now. But it was a real thing at Nasser's time. It was very popular, and he was a great leader. He also had socialist economic policies, built the Aswan Dam, which electrified the whole country, gave like a million people power that was all powered by this water dam. So, yeah, Nasser was based. Yeah, this is basically true. If you were going to make a critique of the Khmer Rouge, you would say that they fought on behalf of the more wealthy rural landlords, and that they were, killing or massacring intellectuals, which is like, just give the intellectuals hard labor. Why you got to massacre them? Poland. I don't know that much about socialist Poland either. We'll put them in B. Albania's already on there. Nicaragua. We talked about this quite a bit on the last episode. Nicaragua had a revolution, guerrilla war revolution, won by the Sandinistas. Their current president, Daniel Ortega, fought in that war on the good guy side. They eventually succumbed to U.S. sanctions and U.S. sabotage efforts, and the U.S. funding of the opposition. So they lost an election and lost power. They regrouped. They took a more Christian socialist bent, and they came back and won the election 6 years later, and they've been in power ever since. They've been sanctioned by the U.S. ever since. And they have very strong supports in the rural regions among rural Venezuelans. They've done a lot to increase standard of life in the rural regions. They have all these healthcare systems and stuff out there that were built by the revolution, and new schools and all sorts of things like that. And these people are willing to fight to defend the revolution. They won electorally, but make no mistake about it, it was the result of class struggle. There's real skirmishes and fights that go on the ground in Nicaragua between the reactionaries and the revolutionaries still to this day. It's still a class struggle, because class struggle continues under socialism, we know. So, yeah, very based. I love Nicaragua. I'm almost tempted to put them in S tier with the Marxist-Leninist countries, the existing Marxist-Leninist countries, but I'll just put them at the very front of A, because I think they're really great, even though they're not ML, and they won an election to take power. GDR. GDR, again, this is one that could go in the S tier if it wasn't, they needed the Soviets to get socialism and to overthrow Hitler. But there are all these statistics about the GDR that show, how standard of living was compared to West Germany, and then also people's politics compared to West Germany. Like, the GDR got rid of all these Nazis, whereas in West Germany, they filtered Nazis into positions of power, either in America or back in Germany. All sorts of disgusting things were going on even after the Nazis were taken out in West Germany. Whereas in East Germany, they were building this more honorable society that also had a better standard of living in many ways. It's crazy to think that Germany this West European country was divided in half, and half of it was communist and half of it, not half, there was more on one side than the other, but it was just divided, and one part was communist and one part was socialist, and the lasting effects that I'm sure that has to this day. But yeah, GDR was awesome, man. Put him up there with Nicaragua. Is this Mozambique or Grenada? It's Grenada. This was Grenada under who was it? Was it Maurice Bishop? Or yeah, Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement. Hyper-based Marxist-Leninist movement overthrown in a coup. Story as old as time. Very cool country. Put them up there in A. Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Even though the U.S. should never have overthrown Saddam, and even though Iraq was much better under Saddam's Ba'athist socialist government than they were without, he still goes in D. Ba'athist socialism has failed now. Assad was the last one. He got taken out. There's going to be probably no more Ba'athist socialism. It was a nice idea, but they didn't commit to things like land redistribution and real communist politics, a real transformation, qualitative transformation of the system, or at least moving in that direction is what they failed to do. And in the end, there was a lot of opportunism, and they were either invaded and murdered by the U.S. or sold out by their own people. That was Syria. Iraq, they just were straight up invaded. I think the people still largely supported Saddam till the end. And I don't even need to explain why it was better to have Saddam doing these, moderately socialist policies and not letting terrorists run the entire country. How that was better than now having ISIS and all these extremist groups fight over power with no real central government. Laos. Laos is S tier. I won't hear any differently. I've talked about this so much on my channel because I'm the only person who even knows that Laos exists. Just kidding. But Laos is a great Marxist-Leninist country, very agrarian, doesn't have the same level of development as Vietnam, and they've always relied upon Vietnam. Did like a reform and opening up type deal in the 90s. But their role in the Vietnam War is why I love them so much. They were so heroic. The Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through Laos. There would be nothing that the Viet Minh likely wouldn't have been able to win without their comrades, the Pathet Lao, which was the name of the Communist Party in Laos. So maybe Huey has something to say about Saddam also gassed Iranians, so he gets a huge thumbs down for that. Huey might have something to say about Laos. I don't know if he knows as much about them as Vietnam, but Laos has been moving towards China. Very true, yeah. Yeah. Basically, every Marxist-Leninist country did a reform and opening up in the 90s. Laotian people are amazing. They are. They're very chill people. Very isolated from the rest of the world. They were hyper isolated under communism. They were so isolated from the rest of the world. And then recently, they opened up to tourism gradually with the reform and opening up period. So very unique people. Libya under Gaddafi did amazing things, made the country the most prosperous in all of Africa. People were living good. The farmers were getting free tools and free land. People were getting health care and education. They were moving towards making an African central bank, moving towards a real Pan-Africanist economy. Genius idea. But he had these critiques of Lenin where he didn't want to be an authoritarian. And in the end, the U.S. funded a bunch of terrorists and extremists who murdered him and overthrew his government, and it's turned into utter chaos, maybe even worse than Iraq in terms of a bunch of terrorists just running around in Libya, selling people into slavery and fighting each other for control of the country, for political power. So again, it's like, who cares if you get called an authoritarian for cracking down on the terrorists who are going to murder you and throw your country into utter chaos and sell slaves? Those people should have authority exerted over them. That is a good thing. But anyways, I'm ranting too much. Gaddafi had a lot of great ideas. The Green Book is great to read. He was a good man. B. This is Mozambique, I believe, under Samora Machel. We'll put them with right next to Mozambique. Nepal. I don't know shit about Nepal. I just know it seems like a whole lot of infighting. The three main parties in Nepal are like a Marxist-Leninist party, and then like a Democratic Socialist party, and then like a Marxist-Leninist Maoist party, or something like that. I can chat GPT it quick. I haven't read about it in a while. I wish Comrade Halali was here. He knows a lot about Nepal. Seems like a whole lot of infighting, but like Marxists seem to be in power. I don't know. Nepal is basically nothing but Mount Everest, right? So it's just like 6 communists in Mount Everest, two in each party. That's the population of Nepal. It's 6 people, 2 people in each party, and they just fight over whether they should be Maoist or Leninist. I'm just kidding. That's disrespectful. They waged a really honorable guerrilla struggle and independence struggle at one point, and it was led by the communists. So you have the Communist Party of Nepal, which is the unified Marxist-Leninist party, which believes in Marxism, Leninism, and democratic socialism. Seems like there's probably a little contradiction there, but whatever. You have the Nepali Congress, which is the Social Democratic or Democratic Socialist, and then you have the Communist Party of Nepal, which is the Maoist party. And then you have like a Hindu nationalist right-wing party, but they're pretty irrelevant. So the consciousness in Nepal is very, very communist, at least. Even if they don't have tons of economic development or the most, even if they don't have socialism with Nepalese characteristics, and they don't have as strong of a direction as the other Marxist-Leninist or Marxist-Leninist leaning countries. So, hey, also cool flag. Just got to be different, I guess. Great football players, too. Calling Cuba a socialist country a joke? It communism. The government own all land. No, Cuba is in the stages of socialism, fairly early stages of socialism, looking to build communism. Socialism is a transitionary state when the workers seize power of the government, which is what happened in oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the date, 1959 in Cuba with the Cuban Revolution. The working class and the peasants, because Cuba was mostly an agrarian economy, a semi-feudal economy, the peasants and the workers rose up and they overthrew the U.S.-backed Batista dictatorship, which was basically a gang, just a gangster that had been installed by the U.S. to run the country so that the U.S. could take all of the sugar and tobacco that was being produced on the plantations. And the plantation workers rose up, they overthrew their government, and they established what we can call a dictatorship of the proletariat, a government that works of, by, and for the workers rather than the owning class. And that government is what's used to then guide the country through the stages of socialism into communism. Once you have that dictatorship of the proletariat, working class power, you're basically in the stage of socialism at that point. It's a qualitative shift out of capitalism and towards socialism. And then you begin the process of building communism, where workers have like full ownership of the means of production and everybody's needs are taken care of, and the country's productive forces are developed so that everyone can have healthcare and food and transportation, and people don't have to spend all day at work. They can have time for recreation, which there's been much more vacation time and recreation time in socialist countries too. We don't talk about that as much. The RTSG guys and Rev talk about that a lot, how socialism means more free time and more time to be a human being and spend time with your family and develop your skills and talents outside of your job. So those are the things that are increased steadily under the stage of socialism after the capitalist government is overthrown. Why is it this Syrian flag? Why isn't it I thought I saved the other one. Oh well. Ba'athist socialism, Syria under Assad. They lasted longer than Iraq. I would say they they work together with Iran rather than fighting a war with Iran, which is good. They get points for that. They get points for supporting the axis of resistance and fighting the Zionists, but they lose points for being overthrown and Assad being scared to take out the terrorists who were regrouping after the first civil war and getting ready to overthrow them again, and not doing land redistribution and real transformative communist politics, in the same way I said with Iraq. The last Ba'athist Socialist, the last Ba'athist Socialist Republic. $5. Thank you, Marco. Appreciate it. We were rolling in super chats today. Keep it coming, y'all. I appreciate it. And Marco's a member, so thank you, Marco. Let Libya be a lesson. There's no half measures. If you aren't subservient to the West, they'll smear and destroy you anyway if they can. Exactly. They're going to smear you as authoritarian and evil and a murderer of your own people, and then they're going to do everything they can to kill you anyways, regardless of what you do in terms of democracy and elections and whatever else. If you move towards socialist economics, which prevents Western banks and multinational corporations from pillaging your country and ripping off and debt trapping the people of your country, if you move towards that, they will do everything they can to murder you and overthrow your country, and they don't care if slavery enters your country afterwards like it did in Libya. They don't care if you have no central government and you're, everybody's living in a violent, impoverished situation for the next decade plus. They do not care. They'll try to kill you. So why try to appease them? Why try to be like, okay, U.S., in the name of democracy, I won't crack down on the terrorists you just gave machine guns and bazookas to. I'll just leave them alone because I want to be democratic and not authoritarian. And then they call you authoritarian anyways. And then those guys they gave the bazookas to come and kill you. It's like they're going to call you authoritarian anyways. Just utilize the authority of the state to crack down on these people who are trying to murder the working class and actually subvert democracy in your country. Do China's anti-extremism policies. Thank you for that super chat comment. We already did that. Venezuela. I feel similar about Venezuela as I do about Nicaragua. Obviously, Venezuela was the first socialist country that I really did a deep dive in and studied the U.S. regime change efforts there. They've been crippled by sanctions, but the socialist sentiment in Venezuela is still strong. The ruling Socialist Party, PSUV, wins the elections year after year after year. They have strong support among the people. And that's because the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution, as it's called, which is a super based name and concept, it's basically socialism with Venezuelan characteristics. It wasn't just them winning an election, right? They didn't just rely on the elections. They did win an election in 1998 after the failed coup attempt led by Hugo Chavez in 1992. They did win an election, but they also had massive support among the trade unions. They had massive support among the working masses. And not only did they have support, but they took steps to get them organized so they can actually exert political force and created new bodies like the National Assembly to give them more say in the government itself. So by deepening these real forms of democracy, by really transferring power from the hands of the rulers and into the hands of the people, they've really deepened their socialist project and allowed themselves to fend off imperialism. There's all these communes in Venezuela, urban and agricultural communes, where people are living collectively in this, very communistic way, and the government funds them and gives them food and, gives them jobs and helps plan the economy for them. So there's all these different, deeply entrenched working class organizations that equal real working class political power. It's not just running in an election every few years and trying to get socialists elected, right? They have real working class power in Venezuela, even though they're not Marxist-Leninist, and they have some weird infatuation with Trotsky. A lot of Venezuelans like Trotsky, and I don't get it, and it worries me, but either way, still very based. Shout out to our friends in Venezuela. Vietnam. Oh boy. Huey's going to be angry now. Boy. Maybe Huey's right. And Vietnam's heading in a horrible direction and they're revisionist and they're going to fall apart. I hope they go the opposite direction. I hope they start moving closer with China and start doing anti-corruption campaigns in the same way that China has and recalibrate their system, in a good direction. But either way, Marxist-Leninist country. The Vietnam War is one of the most inspiring stories of all time. Without them, Laos would not be a Marxist-Leninist country. They're brothers in Laos. They helped every single step of the way. Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh were some of the most heroic people of all time. And they did reform and opening up after the 90s, leaned upon their brothers, leaned upon the other socialist countries, although they have this weird beef with China that I hate. I don't get it. Makes no sense that Vietnam and China hate each other. And when both were socialists, they actually fought a small war. And China was backing Pol Pot in Cambodia while Vietnam went in and took Pol Pot out. Nowadays, some people think that Vietnam has restored capitalism, but the working class is still in control of the government. The party's still in control of the state. So until they lose control of the state and stop centrally planning so many large aspects of their economy, I'm still committed to supporting them. And I still consider them a sovereign Marxist-Leninist country in the 21st century. And if you look at the schools and healthcare facilities and stuff that they built in the rural regions, they've done a lot for their people. And Vietnam was quite industrialized before the revolution and the war, but the U.S. bombing campaigns made it much more difficult for them to transition to socialism because so much shit got destroyed. They would have had a very easy transition to socialism. If it wasn't for that. So either way, even if you're like Huey and you're really critical of Vietnam's government, their system looks nothing like US capitalism. There's tons of central planning, tons of collectively owned land, tons of public owned infrastructure and things. So yeah, I know you don't like the reform and opening up policy. But to be honest with you, I think if Vietnam didn't do reform and opening up, they would have been crushed. They would have been starved and crushed, and the parties wouldn't still be in power. The question is, can they recalibrate the way that China has with the deepening of the poverty alleviation efforts and the anti-corruption campaigns? I agree. They should nationalize a lot of that and crack down on private sector corruption in a really harsh way, which I don't know if they're going to do that or not. That's what China had to do. We know that reform and opening up leads to a lot of problems, right? It vastly increases wealth and it can be a tool, but it releases what Deng called the animal spirits of capitalism. I think that was Deng who called them that. Either way, there's a lot of things that come from that. So it takes a strong state apparatus to control it. I don't know enough about Vietnam, to be honest, to make a strong prediction though about that, about which direction they're heading in. But I hope the party continues to stay on top. Okay, what is this? Somebody tell me what this is. I'm gonna skip it for now. Yugoslavia. The market socialist Yugoslavia. Do I put you in A or B? I'm almost tempted to put them in A because Yugoslavia was torn apart by ethnic fighting. And it's a really good example of the thing I've been talking about recently, where big countries are able to unite a lot of different kinds of people, different nationalities, different ethnic and religious groups, which Yugoslavia was able to do. And they get points just for being able to do that. And for the Yugoslavs who sacrificed their lives to fight Hitler and Nazism, fascism, Mussoliniism. But Tito's debates with the USSR were pretty stupid. I side with the USSR in pretty much all of them. China learned a lot from Yugoslavia's mistakes and their successes. They had like this market socialism thing that was good. It was much better than what they have now. Really an absolute tragedy what's happened to the country. They made a huge mistake taking IMF and World Bank loans in the 70s, I believe. Let me see. Who do I have in A? These are mostly Marxist-Leninist countries or still existing non-Marxist-Leninist socialist countries. So Yugoslavia's got to go B. Did Tito technically consider himself ML, even though he did the market socialism thing? He did. Interesting. But he basically changed it so much they had to call it Titoism. I don't know. We'll put him in A. You know what? I'll be generous today. Shout out to him. You're welcome, Tito. I wish you lived forever. Does anyone know what this is? What this flag is? That's not what I want. What is that flag? Someone help, please. Oh, it's South Yemen. Okay, that's why I didn't know it, because it no longer exists. South Yemen was awesome. There was a good chance that I believe North Yemen had a leader who was elected, and he was like a nationalist leader. But he wanted to unite North Yemen with South Yemen. And it would have been so awesome. Yemen has a history of based politics. You all know they're based today with the Houthis, right? They have a history of this. They had like a super based government in the north, I believe. And then in the south, they had the communist government plus a lot of Yemeni nationalists who supported the communist government. And there was like a U.S. coup in the north or something. And then they ended up fighting a civil war, and the unity never happened, and the communist government went away. It's a tragic story. But of course, the Yemenis are still extremely based with the Houthis, who are essentially, Arab communists. So really tragic story. But shout out to Yemen. Always been attacked by imperialism. We'll put them up at the front of B here with Afghanistan. Almost done, guys. Almost done. 2 more. We'll start with Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara. Amazing, uncorruptible man. Completely uncorruptible man. Sold off all the government's luxury goods. Launched campaigns to plant trees and teach people to read and give people education and healthcare. Brutally murdered in a Western coup. Didn't do enough to crack down upon the traitors within his own administration, and he was betrayed by his best friend, Blaise Compaoré, who had been taking Belgium, I believe, and maybe U.S. money, working together with whatever Western intelligence agencies. So Sankara's definitely a personal hero of mine. I love that guy. So they were Marxist-Leninists but failed, which means we should put them in A. That's where most of the failed ML states have been going. Why is Burkina Faso so much bigger than the rest? And I mean, now, could you even consider them a socialist state today under Traoré? I mean, it's a very reasonable thing to propose. Number 1, or the last one, which will be in number 1, the USSR. I know that all the other socialist countries who ultimately failed, were not an S tier, but the USSR gets to be an S tier by being virtue of the very first socialist experiment, the one that paved the way for all the others. So every other socialist country, including China, and China did this extensively, could look at the USSR and say, what did they do right and what did they do wrong? Right? They could learn from their mistakes and from their successes. And this was a huge reason for the success that the Chinese had, especially in the early years, studying Soviet central planning and how it operated. The October Revolution changed the world, right? It showed that the toiling masses, the working people of a country, could form their own state, their own government, and govern themselves, that they didn't need the overlords, right? That these myths about us needing to be ruled by capitalists who are so much smarter and genius than us, that these myths were not true, and the working people could create their own government, a government which vastly increased life expectancy and standard of life, teaching everyone to read, bringing everyone health care, industrializing the country, defeating the Nazis, giving everyone more vacation time, giving their citizens more calories than what American citizens were getting, but with even healthier food. right? Not even healthier food, but with healthier food. The USSR was the inspiration for the rest of the world. It was the model for the rest of the world to follow. And sometimes, like here in the US, the CPUSA followed that model a little too closely. Instead of doing what the Chinese did, learning from the Soviets' mistakes and applying Marxism uniquely to their own unique conditions. But still, the USSR paved the way for everything after, and we owe a great debt. We should all be very grateful to the man Vladimir Lenin and the other Bolsheviks who led that 1917 revolution, the day that shook the world. 10 days that shook the world. That's the name of that John Reed book, right? That's a good name for the book, because that explains why the USSR was what it was. Like, even because it shook the world, it inspired workers globally. Even the Zapatistas in Mexico, who were anarchists, loved the Bolsheviks, right? And they were like, we should do what the Bolsheviks are doing. This was before, I think, Marxism, Leninism. It was because Stalin was the first person who coined that term. It was before Marxism, Leninism was being spread. So you had these anarchists in Mexico who were like, yes, Bolshevism's awesome. We should do exactly what they're doing. They wanted to be Marxist Leninists. They just didn't have the theory yet. All right, there's the list, folks. What do you think? Should I download it? Is this going to give my computer AIDS? There we go. Maybe I should tweet it out. Which ones do you disagree with the most or agree with the most? Let me see if I made any mistakes here. Nepal could definitely be lower. Definitely could be lower. I just don't know enough about it. Yugoslavia could be lower for sure. For sure, a lot of people would drop Yugoslavia lower because of the stupid debates Tito had with Stalin and, insisting upon going his own way. No, it looks pretty good, though. I guess Poland and Czechoslovakia could be higher. The Czechoslovak Soviet Republic, or Socialist Republic, not Soviet, Socialist. They could be higher. I just don't know anything about them. And Pol Pot should be S tier. All right.